to Python. So in this video, we're going to be analyzing a CSV file that contains weather data using Python. So the plan is to take a file that has imperial units and create a new file that converts it to metric units. So let's first see the data file we're going to be working with. And by the way, all of the code and these files will be available on our GitHub, and the link will be provided in the description below. So I have my file in a folder called test, and I advise you to put all your files in one folder so you don't have any directory or routing problems. So let's open up this folder, and the file name is called weather. So let's open that up on Excel. And this is how it looks on Excel. We can see that there are quite a few columns. You have city, date, high temperature, low temperature, average temperature, departure, HDD, and so on. So if you open this file on, let's say, Notepad, you can see a more raw version of the data where the data is actually stored with commas. However, Excel just beautifies that data into this, so we have columns instead. However, we're only going to be using city, date, high temperature, low temperature, and precipitation. So let's start off by creating a new file with just that information. So let's get rid of this. Let's put this onto the side. Let's create a function called clean data. And we'll pass in the weather file. Now we will create a new variable called old file to reference the file. So we can use the open function. I don't know, I'll explain what that is. So the open function takes in two parameters, the first one being the file and the second one being the mode. R is short for read, and this allows Python to open and access our file. So after that, let's create a new list. And this list is going to take each line of the file. So we can access each line of the file by actually using a for loop. We can say for line in old file. And we're going to be actually accessing each line as a string. However, it's ideal that we store them in a list, so it's easier to manipulate later on. And one way we can do that is by using the split function. Okay, so what the split function does is that it basically splits a string into a list based on the parameter you pass in. So if you pass in a comma, it'll split before every comma. If you don't pass in anything, it'll split on empty spaces. So if you remember, the CSV file is separated its data by a comma. So let's pass in a comma. Now we're going to be appending list 1 onto list. So we're basically appending the list that stores each line. So we are going to have each line as a list within a list. If that's unclear, we're going to be printing it out in just a second. So hopefully that will clear things. And before we print, let's just pop out the first line because we don't need the titles of the columns right now. So let's print out that list. And now let's call the function. and the data file name is weather. So let's run that. And first we gotta save. So let's go onto desktop. Let's type in test right here. And then we'll save it there. Oh, file name. So let's call this we'll just call it test1. So let's save that. And it says no directory weather. So let's try out CSV. Run that. It's not printing out anything. Oh, so it says squeezed text. So let's open that up. And it might make idle slow. However, let's open it up anyway because we want to see what the list stores. So if you can see, it's a list, an entire list that has smaller lists inside the list. So you have a list with all of San Francisco for one particular date, and then you have another list with San Francisco with another date, and then you can keep going on. And now this has actually slowed down my idle, so I'm just going to go over to Task Manager and then quit Python right now. So I'm going to end task, and I got rid of that. So let's go open up test1 again. Okay, so hopefully that makes it clear what the list stores. So now let's get rid of this print statement, and let's create two more lists. So let's create a list collect, and this list will store each column that we are going to collect. So remember city, date, high, low, and precipitation. And then list final. This is going to store the whole line after each loop. So let's create a for loop. We can call it for element in list, and we can append to list collect. So we're going to be accessing the element, and we have to put a particular index. So if you recall, I mentioned again, we're going to be using city, date, high, low, and city is at the 0th index. So I'm going to be accessing 0. So now I'm going to do that for all of the columns. So that should be good. We have element 0, 1, 2, and 3, and 8. So this will append all those elements into list collect. So now list collect just includes city, date, high, low, average, no, not average, and precipitation. So let's append that whole group onto list final. Okay, and now after each loop, we're going to be emptying that list collect. So after every loop, it'll be fresh again, and we can grab each element without it adding more spaces to the list. Now, you can use the .clear function, or you can use this. However, I'm just going to use the .clear function. But a problem that comes up with the code that we have right now is that even if we have appended list collect onto list final, it's still list collect. So if we use the clear function, it'll actually delete all the data stored into list final, even if it's already been stored. So one way to solve this would just be to not append a list collect, but instead a copy of list collect. So that's the copy function. So for now, just know that this function copies the list. We'll go more in depth about it in the data structure series, but for now that should be good. So let's print out list final and see what that is. Hopefully Python doesn't crash again. Okay, it's gonna crash, but I'm still gonna show it to you because opening it up doesn't take that long. So this includes all of the data that we want, just the city, the date, the high, the low, and the precipitation. So we have that good now. However, Python is slow again, so I'm gonna go back to the task manager. Okay, slowing down. Okay, so now we're back. Let's continue on. So now so far we have read a file and put the elements we want to use in a list. Now let's transfer that list onto a new CSV file, and that will actually save us from having a slow Python shell. So in addition to this parameter, let's add a new one called cleaned weather file name. And this is where we can basically put the name of the file we want to transfer to. And if you don't have this file created in a folder, Python will actually do it for you. So let's go back to the beginning. Okay. Alright, so let's get rid of print list final. And let's create a new file. And instead of reading it this time, we're actually going to be writing it. So it would be open cleaned weather file name. And instead of R, we're going to be writing W. So in the beginning of the file, remember we got rid of the columns, but now we are going to put the columns back. So the way we can print on to a CSV file is just by printing out the columns, of course. So city, date, high, low, precipitation, okay, and that's the end of the column. And then we can add a parameter to this print function, just referencing the file name, and we'll say that's equal to new file. Okay, so now let's write a for loop that can go through list final. So now to note, some of the data values for precipitation actually has T instead of a number, and we don't want that because we're going to be converting the temperature into metric units, so that'll create a problem if we pass through a t. So if element 4, so element 4 is actually precipitation, so if that equals t, we'll just set element 4 equal to 0. Now, when type in a line, I'll explain what this line does. So the join function returns a string in which the elements of a sequence have been joined by a string separator. So we're basically making each element in the list a string again, so we can write it onto the file. So it kind of does the reverse of what split does. So now let's print each element onto the file. So that should be good. Now remember, we added a parameter, so we have to add another parameter here. So let's call this, we can just call this metric.csv. And again, if you don't have a file named metrics.csv in your folder, it's completely fine. I don't either. Python will create the file for you. So let's go ahead and run this. Alright, everything seems to be working. So let's go check out our folder now. So now we have a new file called metric. So let's open that up on Excel. And you can see we just have city, date, high, low, and precipitation. So that's pretty cool. Now let's create functions that can convert Fahrenheit to Celsius and inches to centimeters. So def f to c, ftemp as a parameter, and this is some basic stuff. I'm just going to be using the basic formula. So these two functions can be used to convert from imperial to metric. So let's move on to the final part, which is where we actually create the function called convert data to metric. And we're going to pass in the imperial weather file name and the metric weather file name. So instead of metric.csv down here, we should have actually named it imperial. That was a mistake on my part. So let's call that imperial. Let's comment this out first. So now let's run it. It still should be good. And let's get rid of this. Let's go back to the file. Let's get rid of metric because we're going to be creating a different file called metric with actual metric units. So, okay, that's good. So let's get rid of this comment. So this is going to be pretty basic, similar to what we did in the previous function, we're gonna open up the imperial file, and we're not gonna do anything besides read it. We're not gonna write it, so it should be that. So let's go with R, and then now we can actually open up metric file. So now let's create a new list called list 4, and for line in imperial file, we'll do list 5 equals line dot split, and then similarly to what we did last time, we'll append list 4. We'll append list 5 to list 4. And then we can pop out the first line that has all the column names. And now we'll do for element in list 4. And now the low temp this is how we would convert it. So we'll round, and before rounding we can use the function that we've created. And then of course it's a string right now, so we have to convert it into an int. Okay, and then let's do high temp. And let's do precipitation. Instead of int, we'll use float. And then we will take third element and set that equal to low temp. So we're overriding the current temperature that's in imperial units. So now to end it off, we just have that third for loop for element in list 4. We're going to be joining just like last time. So everything from the last for loop is pretty much the same. The only difference we did is we converted from imperial to metric. So let's join element and then print element with the file being metric file. Now let's run that function. We can comment this out. We're done with that. So let's write the function convert data to metric. And the title of the file is imperial.csv. And let's create metric.csv. So let's go ahead and run that. So I made an error on the pop. So instead of a list.pop, it should be a list4.pop. So let me go ahead and correct that. And if we run, so there's no error now. So let's go back and check the test folder. See if it worked. So we have metric here. Let's open that up. And as you can see, they're rounded properly, and the precipitation is rounded 2 decimal places. As you can see, we put round 2, rounded 2 places here. So everything seems to be working. And well, that's it for this video. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Hope to see you in the next one.